I've got an interesting question because I think a lot of people may not naturally make this bridge. So you sit right now, I think, within the School of Journalism, right? So you don't necessarily sit within a computer science post or something like that. Can you talk about that intersection and what makes that meaningful and what makes that important?
Yeah, that's a great question, Perry. I always tell people, I sort of say to my colleagues, like my job is to tell students what not to do, and their job is to teach students how to do the right thing. Um, the reason I ended up in a journalism school is kind of a long story, but to get to the heart of your question, I study the people that are behind technology, right? So I'm studying the social stories of the people, where they're at, where they're living. I spend time with the propagandists themselves, and that includes, going to places like Turkey or India or South America. And I think that this is a crucial thing that needs to happen because oftentimes we disassociate disinformation campaigns or propaganda from the people who are actually producing it.
Right.
And in doing so, we're focusing sort of on the symptom, but not actually on the actual cause. And the cause of a lot of these disinformation campaigns tends to be things like deep polarization in a lot of the countries we're talking about. And so people with some coding knowledge figure out they can use an army of bots to spread disinformation, and they say, why wouldn't I do that? And then simultaneously, governments and non-state actors like terrorist groups and hacking collectives that rely upon the public's lack of understanding of how the systems work. And so the reason I'm in a journalism department is it's kind of like, for me, it's more about exposing what's going on behind the scenes
Yeah.
rather than focusing on the problem of disinformation itself. And so I always try to tell people I'm fundamentally concerned with humans. Like, I don't really care about bots or things like that. I only care about them insofar as they're mechanisms for doing things that people want to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. Good journalists are always on a quest for truth, and getting to find um, real truth, if I can put that in quotes, it is increasingly hard because of the signal to noise ratio and the ability to kind of amplify disinformation so much within the past decade or so. I think disinformation has been a fundamental problem for all seekers of truth throughout history. But we do seem to be in an age when it's increasingly easy to turn a lot of ears and a lot of eyeballs in a certain direction and to give that direction some credibility.
Yeah, that's spot on. My next book, which comes out next year with Yale University Press, is called Manufacturing Consensus, and it builds on the idea from Herman and Chomsky of manufacturing consent, which is, for me, the way I change it is I say all these tools that we're seeing, social media, bots, sock puppet accounts, they're
Yeah.
all being used to create the illusion of popularity for ideas that otherwise probably wouldn't get a lot of traction.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is a lot of people get off the road to critical thinking an exit too soon, and they go much more towards conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And social media and the current media system that we have makes that really, really easy because you can digest really small parts of information and kind of, put together your own truth rather than
Mhm.
capital T truth, Perry.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that so there's a couple things around that I want to explore in just a minute, but I don't want to dominate things. So I want to turn it over to Rosa because I know that with her CIA background, she's probably got a few different insights and questions that you may have triggered as well.
Well, you had talked about traveling the world and learning from different influencers of sorts. And I loved your point about how it works fundamentally in the same way that marketing does to influence people's decision making. In that case, it's usually a purchase of some sort. I'm interested in your insights on how the role of culture can change how those influences work, influencing in the United States versus influencing in India or Turkey. Some cultures interpret data and are influenced differently. And what were your findings as you worked through all of those cultures and languages?
That's an excellent question, Rosa. Yeah, propaganda and disinformation are culturally contextual. Contextual. That's a mouthful. So they look very different depending on where they're happening. And the motivations, not only do the motivations of the people who are spreading it look different, but so too does the reception look different and the content. And so, if we look at the United States, I think as a country, we're very open to advertising. We kind of understand what the commercial sphere looks like. But historically in the United States, we've had a pretty clear delineation between what commercial speech, so advertising, looks like versus what political speech looks like. And that's changed a bit with Citizens United and things like that. But I do think that that now, with the advent of computational propaganda and what some people call network propaganda, we're seeing a big change in the United States. So there's becoming a blurring of the lines between what's political and what's commercial. And that's always been true in some sense. Like, there was always loaded political messaging in the news and things like that. But now what we're seeing is sort of a growth of political marketing that is making use of our data in a way that has never happened before. Now, this stands in contrast to what we see in other countries. I spent some time in Eastern Europe, and there's not as much of an expectation of division between politics and the commercial sphere in places like the Ukraine or places like Hungary.
Where the political history is so dramatically different, and they're often one-party systems. Yeah, makes sense.
Yes, exactly, Rosa. And so that in and of itself makes it so that people are simultaneously more suspicious of the informational environment, but they're also in interesting ways more susceptible to the kinds of propaganda that we see flowing in those spaces, particularly from places like Russia. The same could be said to be true in Taiwan, or even increasingly in places like Japan, because of their close proximity to China and what China is attempting to do in the political ecosystem, political communication ecosystem in those areas. So cultural context really matters. And unfortunately, I would say right now we've had a huge focus on, fortunately or unfortunately, we've had a huge focus on Russia and Russian-focused info operations and propaganda. We really need to work on growing two other areas. We need to better understand the Chinese sphere, because if Hong Kong and what's gone on there is any indication, China will only become a greater player in this internationally. And then we also need to understand the sphere that is, less clearly defined state-based actors, and more along the lines of loosely affiliated groups of extremists.